Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales. This could be due to a lack in confidence, comfort, just not wanting to be salesy. We want to help our customers. We know we can, but we complicate the process. This podcast is designed to help folks like you improve its sales through process, practice, frameworks, and thinking. This is Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. This episode is brought to you by the Catalyst Sale Game Plan. Head to catalystsale.com/game plan for more information. Amber Naslund, principal consultant at LinkedIn, joins me today. Amber leverages her expertise to help some of the top brands in the world build outstanding digital content strategies. Amber, it is awesome to have you on the podcast. You are another one of those people who I've kind of met and connected with on Twitter, then moved over to LinkedIn, and you're with LinkedIn, but who connected on Twitter originally, and here we are on a podcast. So thank you.
Yay, internet. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So there's some really cool things that the internet does well, and there's some things that the internet does not do very well. Why can't we do more of the things that the internet does well?
Human beings are messy, man. We don't seem to like easy or simple. So I don't know. I think that I always jokingly say that the internet is it's a magnifying glass of what we all already are. So it's like there's good, bad, and ugly in the world, and the internet just makes that clearer to me. So I don't know. That's how I see it.
I just don't understand why we feel compelled to get into messy and ugly and some of these other things. Like it's the draw. It's like there's this, when I think about it, like driving down the freeway or you see a car accident and the accident's on the side of the road. Do you just keep looking ahead so that you don't run into someone, or do you look over and see the accident? Why do we feel just drawn to this things?
Like the train wreck that is social media sometimes. I do think that there is part of it that we're just gluttons for punishment, and it's a magnifying glass on sociological things that we don't normally get to see, right? Because we get to interact with or communicate with or see people that we wouldn't normally in our everyday lives. I mean, think about how overwhelmed people get when some celebrity follows them on Twitter, as if they think that the celebrity actually cares what they have to say. That's not it. It's like just being able to see and be seen in areas of the world that we wouldn't normally get to touch based on the limitations of, geography or circumstance or whatever. The internet brings us closer to so many things. And so there's a natural curiosity for us, especially when things go sideways, when it's messy and ugly. I mean, your analogy was perfect. It's like, can you drive past an accident and not look? Like, you can't. So there's part of the world of social media where we're just insatiably curious about things that we don't recognize, that we don't understand. And the internet gives us a window into a lot of that in ways that we can't get other ways. So I don't know. I look at the world right now of the weird time that we're living in 2020, which feels like some alternate reality. And somebody coined the term doom scrolling, and it's like, right, because you just keep looking and going, it can't possibly get any weirder than this, right? And yet it does, but you can't seem to look away because it's just this kind of constant, I don't know if it's what brain chemicals are those, serotonin and dopamine and all those things that you get like reinforced by looking at the chaos, but it's really hard to tear yourself away from. I mean, it's critical, but it's really hard to tear yourself away from.
So are there ways that we can leverage that for good? Like, is there a way that we can take advantage of this natural occurrence of getting sucked into the noise or sucked into the doom scrolling? And are there ways that we can turn that around and actually use it for good?
I think so. I mean, since the very early days of being connected through the online world, which, I'll age myself by saying it was a really long time ago, IRC and stuff like that. And it's leaning into community as a thing that we are driven to as humans. That's just we're herd animals and we like to be with and around other people. But we have to consider the benevolent use of that power. So how do we end up finding, and I don't just mean gravitating toward like-minded people, although I think there's more value in that than everybody's always like diverse perspectives. I can talk about that separately, but there's something to be said for finding your people. And the internet makes that easier than it has ever been because, like I said earlier, when we were kids, the friends we had were the ones that we went to school with and the ones that were in our classroom. And then as we get older, it's the people who we're on campus with at college or the people we work with in our office. And so we are kind of bound by those circumstantial relationships or the people that we're neighbors with. The internet pulled down all those walls. So now you can find your people almost anywhere. And I think in part that is what contributes to diversity of thought, is people feeling seen and accepted and belonging for who and what they are, and finding other pockets of people who feel like that, because there is a sense of safety and confidence in numbers. So it's important for us to find our tribes of people. And when we've found that, I think it's super critical that we use our ability to connect and communicate through these digital tools by advocating for the things that we care about. And it's the building things up versus tearing them down. There's such a terrible culture in social media of harsh criticism and keyboard warriorness, and like we all get really brave about saying crappy things about people's work and livelihoods. And instead, if we can use that for positive and constructive, and I don't mean like blowing sunshine up people's skirts, I mean like literally working to build up the things that we care about, that is positive momentum. And that's how we make the most of what we've been given in terms of the connectivity of the internet. But so many people are so easily drawn into the negativity of it. And I really believe it's a conscious effort to pull yourself out of that swamp and be willing to do work with people who share your values to build something versus just working to tear something else down.
I've got a couple of kids. They're 15 and now 18. So I guess the 18-year-old is no longer a kid. And we had that conversation. So you can now be tried as an adult. So be aware. And I can tell you, it just happened last week too, which is funny because it's not like mentally he's all of a sudden accelerated and things are completely different today than they were a week ago. So we go through this. You talked about belonging. So in community, and we want to have this sense of belonging. And for me, it's things like barbecue. Mm-hmm. It's things like getting out in the Jeep. It's things like talking about the New York Jets or the Islanders, so sports, playing golf. Like these are things, sales, these are learning and development. These are areas where we can start to cluster. And it's amazing the information we have that shows how many other people are out there who cluster around these same kind of things. Yet, if someone enters into a conversation, it's almost like our brain thinks the entering into the conversation is conflicting with whatever it is that I was trying to say, rather than looking at it and saying, hey, we're actually having discourse here. So one of the things I really like about Twitter is there seems to be a fair amount of discourse back and forth. In LinkedIn, some of these things can turn into echo chambers, where if I add a comment, I'm pulling away from somebody else's rather than adding to it and trying to turn it into a conversation. How can we converse better as human beings in these social channels and avoid some of the negative stuff that happens where the bias originally, it seems like the bias is, and I'm basing this on anecdotal information when I look at some of these threads, the bias is, hey, if someone's commenting, they're taking away from my point rather than adding to my point. How can we be better citizens in the way that we communicate with each other in these channels?
That's a great question, a complicated and nuanced discussion. And I think I fundamentally don't agree with the premise that the difference is by platform. I think that has to do with the way that you choose to build the communities that you participate in online. So a lot of times people will complain about the culture of the people they follow on Twitter or the people they're connected to on LinkedIn. And I have to remind them all the time, you have the power of the unfollow, block, and mute buttons at your disposal. Part of this curation is on you to make sure that you are tending your own garden. We've been given the opportunity to open the doors, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we should just accept everything that walks in the door. So part of the burden and responsibility of that is on us to make sure that we are creating the experiences that we want online and reinforcing those boundaries. Like I've gotten pretty ruthless about the boundaries I enforce online. And if you can't come to me, you're welcome to disagree with me. If you can't do so, especially if you're a stranger to me, if you can't do so in a respectful way, that's an instant block from me. If the first thing that comes out of your mouth is snark or nastiness, I don't have time for that. There's just way too few. I have too many other things to do in my life. But the second thing is, this is hard to teach, but I think it's critical, is slowing down enough to have empathy for other people. And there's a long-ranging debate about whether empathy is something that you can teach or whether it's innate. But especially when we're communicating on something like Twitter in 280 characters at a pop, that's not very long. It's not very much. So you're making value judgments about humans based on this tiny little piece of context. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know anything about their life. You don't know anything about who they are or how they exist outside of that little block. And so part of it is remembering that there are humans on the other side of that keyboard and being willing to pause. And if someone, to your point about like detracting from other people's conversations, if you're contributing to that dialogue, doing so requires you to think for a moment that your aims and that your goals in that conversation are not first. So if somebody else is fostering a dialogue, it's one thing to contribute, but it's the same thing as anything else. Like if I'm contributing, that means I'm giving something additional to the conversation. Whereas if I look at every conversation as an opportunistic moment for me to redirect the dialogue in my direction for something that I want, well, go start your own post, or go start your own conversation about those things. So really part of it is just like taking off our hat of everything is about me for a hot minute and realizing that the communities that we're participating in, we are stewards of that as well. And we have to show up as good digital citizens with an empathetic, I am part of something bigger than myself attitude. And I think so much of the toxicity online comes from when we forget that.
Such an important point that you made as you started out, which is it's not platform dependent. It's platform agnostic. It's the way that you take the time to curate your network, curate the space where you point your light toward or shine your light toward and put attention to. And you've got the ability, you have power. You have the power to, like you said, block, mute. You have a level of control that you can apply, and know that the network that you've got today probably didn't build in the last 24 hours. And if you want it to change, it's probably not going to change in the next 24 hours, but you can constantly do the things that you need to do in order to get things working in a way that's more, provides more positive energy than negative energy. Fair?
Absolutely. I mean, so I will caveat everything I just said by saying that there are absolutely inherent biases that are built into our systems. And that's we could have a whole separate discussion on that. For marginalized communities and people who don't have an even footing on their voice, it's a lot harder to emphasize those boundaries if you are, say, a person of color or a woman in tech or someone with disabilities. All of those populations have to work so much harder to reinforce those boundaries and to not be on the other end of a bunch of toxic nonsense on the internet. So I think it's really important for me to acknowledge that I sit in a very privileged position as a white woman who is in an upper middle class, tier. I have a lot of more power than some other people might. And I think in part, that's why I view it as so important for me to use my voice for good and for constructive, positive building in these communities, because there are a lot of people who don't have the same platform that I do or the same ability to be heard. And I need to advocate for them too. So when I say it's like the responsibility is on us, I say that with very keen awareness that not everybody is starting from the same place. But I think that when we model the kinds of behaviors that we expect from other people on these digital channels, we start setting standards for how we expect people to behave and treat us. And one of the things that drives me a little bit crazy right now is there's this, I don't even know the right word. There's this like uproar, I guess, about how toxic something like Twitter has become. But we foster that behavior. Every time something really bad happens, what do? We retweet it and we point at it and we're like, look how awful this is. And by giving that toxicity even more momentum and visibility and platform, we are reinforcing that for the people who are predisposed to that behavior in the first place. So part of it is by giving it our attention and our fuel, we are rewarding the behaviors that we don't want. This is like classic operant condition. You don't want your dog, to bark at the doorbell. Well, if you don't give him treats when he barks at the doorbell. So we're giving these people treats for behaving that way. And we are making it easier for that sort of stuff to exist. So we have to model different behaviors if we are expecting other people to show up differently on these channels. And we each have a role to play in that.
And we all can do better. So like in the example that you gave before, where it's like, hey, it's my obligation, or so there's an opportunity for us. And I got connected through with Backstage Capital and some of the stuff that Arlen was doing through by seeing her stuff on Twitter and engaging with folks, and then created an opportunity where I was a mentor for the group and for the LA cohort, the first cohort that went through. That's because I actively pursued it based on seeing things. So I took a positive view on it. It wasn't that they came and contacted me and said, hey, Mike, I'd like you to help us with whatever. No, I engaged in conversation. You start to build rapport kind of in the same way that you go to a cocktail party or you go to a conference, or you go to an event. You don't go in there with a big poster board saying, hey, I'm here and this is all the cool ways that I can help you. Come over and talk with me. You go and you engage in conversation. And the thing that you've got to be really careful about is things can be amplified and taken out of context very quickly because, just like Amber was talking about, you've got a short piece of information. And I mean, just think about language. Like language, if I say, and this is going to come across horrible, but if I say, hey, I'm not wearing pants, I'm wearing shorts, I say that here in the States, that's interpreted differently than it is in the UK. Yet contextually, I'm using language that makes sense for me, but I've not taken the time to understand, does the person on the other end perceive this or interpret this in a different manner based on their past experience, based on where they're coming through. And I think the big one is agenda. So many people are operating with a specific agenda out there, and they think that their agenda is elevated above somebody else's agenda because they're thinking about them. Ask the question, what am I contributing? What am I contributing from a value chain perspective? Am I trying to take more that I'm giving, or am I giving more than I'm taking? And where does that fit on that continuum as we interact? Just treat freaking people like people. Like,
it's crazy to me how one of the biggest mistakes I think we made in the digital universe is those of us who were engaged early and huge advocates of the potential of digital and social media. We talked about all of the ways it could do such great things for us. So lots of people showed up expecting to reap instant rewards and dividends from, like, I showed up, where's my participation trophy for being here? And much like offline communities, you get out what you put in. So people ask me about LinkedIn all the time because I work there, and it's like, you have to build the network long before you need it. And if you expect the community to deliver value to you, you have to start by putting value in to begin with. And when I say value, I don't just mean from like a sales and business perspective. I mean value as a good citizen of the digital universe. Do you care about other people? Do you demonstrate that you care? Do you take action about the things that you care about? Do you raise your voice when you see injustices? Do you do the things that are part of being part of a community? Just because we're doing this in digital space doesn't mean that the human mechanics behind it aren't really important. I mean, like, the internet has a short fuse and a long memory, and you have to operate with that in mind, knowing that your job is to show up as your best self. We don't always have great days. All of us have, we all have unawesome days, and I'm as guilty of that as the next person. And anybody who knows me online knows that I'm pretty outspoken and I'm pretty vulnerable and I'm pretty matter of fact about stuff. Like, I have a pretty open book. However, like, intention counts for a ton. So when I show up online, I'm doing so not just because, again, I'm trying to further an agenda, like you said. It's because I'm actually trying to, like, be part of something. And being part of something also means sometimes showing up and giving more than I get. And going about things that way has meant that I have gotten far more out of it than I ever could have expected, because I feel like I made the deposits in advance. So when I needed to lean on the community for support or advocacy on my behalf, they showed up in spades.
Yeah. And these are basic things. Like, there's nothing like new or novel here. We're like, wow, you know what? That's the first time I've heard this thing. I mean, think about what's the old saying about when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Today, right? So, and there's the, what is it? Build your well before you need to drink. book around networking. And these are things that have been out there for an extended period of time. Now what we have are new mediums for communication. Amber was talking about, we've got an amazing opportunity to engage with people with a much more diverse set of beliefs, experiences, views that they have, because we're not only focused on operating in our current environment. And I was talking with a couple of people it was maybe a week or two ago, we were looking at how many people have never moved beyond 15 miles outside of the place that they were born. And it's fascinating to think about the number of people who've not moved or lived outside of that area. And then even go a different level where you say, how many people have not gone outside of that area, haven't traveled outside of that area? And here, through the wonders of the internet and social networking and everything else, we now start to see people who have experiences that go much further beyond. And I think we can come back to the core. Like if you ask this question, what do people want? What do people want? The thing that comes to mind for me is people want to know that they can provide a house where folks can go home and be safe, like a place of refuge. Like everybody, I'd be hard pressed to find someone out there in the world who says, I don't want my family when they come home to our house to say they feel safe.
Yep.
So we've got common ground that we can all operate in. And
we do. And I also think it's complicated because we have common ground, but not always equal footing. And that's, I think, the hardest thing for people to get their heads around is that, yes, we are all human and we share very fundamental human needs for, the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Fundamental need for belonging and safety and all of those things. Yeah. But to your earlier comment, I think the beauty of what we have on the internet, like the internet has taught me so much, being able to look at the world through the eyes of people who live different experiences than I do. But it requires a willingness from all of us to shut up for a minute and listen to that versus just waiting for our turn to speak. That requires, again, there are times where, so I was commenting earlier this year when there was the real teeth of social justice initiatives was very highly covered. Like those are ongoing, but they were really in the news for a while. And I said to people, a couple people commented that I'd been quiet. And I said, look, other than raising up other voices that I think probably need to be heard other than mine, I don't know that I have much to say right now because I'm listening and learning. And there are times where our role in these communities needs to be to absorb what we are seeing and hearing, because that is how we change our own perspectives. That's how we broaden our own thinking. And you can't do that if you're unwilling to do it. And you can't even do it if you're not aware that that's a thing that we all need to do. So I think so many people are like, I've got this all figured out. I know how this is. I know what lives those people lead. I know what their experiences must be like. And it's like, no, you don't. There's plenty of people who don't know what it's like to be me, a woman in technology. There's plenty of people who don't know what it's like to be a person of color. Like Arlen trying to do what she's doing in the venture capital world is like, that's monumental stuff, but I don't know her experience. I don't live that experience. So listening to her and paying attention and believing her when she shares those experiences is critical. So that, again, back to that empathy thing, we've got to care about what other people are experiencing and pause long enough to absorb that if we're ever going to be better at this.
How can we get better at listening? And I know you talked about pause. What are some things that we can do to get better at listening, improve listening skills or improve absorption or improve any of these things so we get better at understanding?
Again, not to like oversimplify it, but man, it's sort of like anything else. Like I've been personally since about March, I've been working really hard to lose weight and get healthier. And it's making a plan and sticking to it and doing that every single day. And for as many like complex, crazy fad diets are out there, it's like fewer calories in than out and more movement and eating less crap. So it really is a matter of like simplicity, but consistency. And I really do feel like the internet is similar. You have to make the commitment to do it. I'm going to show up today and listen and spend some of your time online reading and observing and not just paying it token like ear service, right? Or eyeball service to read it or listen to it, but soak on it and spend some time reflecting on it and consider that that is a thing that you actually need to deliberately spend time doing in order, because it's not, if it's not something that you're used to doing, you don't have the muscle memory for it yet. It's not a skill that you've honed. And I do think listening is a skill. So I think it's something we have to all recognize that most of us aren't great at it. We all need to probably improve it. And so making deliberate changes to spend time in our days in small increments to do just that. Spend 10 minutes on your Twitter feed and say nothing, just read and pay attention to what people are saying. Or spend time on LinkedIn reading what other people are writing instead of posting your own stuff. It sounds so counterintuitive, but I honestly think it is the only way to get better at this, is just to like dig in and make a concerted effort to do it, because it's the only thing that changes behavior.
And if you find that everybody in your feed is saying the same stuff and you're always agreeing with everybody that's in your feed, find some other people to put in your feed. Like we like to confirm things. We like to, and we've talked about, we're turning this into a psychology discussion where we talk about different forms of conditioning and the various biases that we fall victim of or fall into trap. And it's because there's a comfort in realizing there are other people in a community that believe and think and say the same things that we do. So if you're looking at your feed and you agree with everything in that feed, then I would challenge you to go find some people who have a counter perspective, an alternative perspective to that, because it can help you with just the thinking process. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, confirmation bias is a thing because it's a thing, especially right now in a very heated political climate, it's easy to go on and be like, I believe these things. I'm going to Google the thing and look, these first couple of results agree with me. There was actually a fascinating experiment where I watched a gentleman talk about how he deliberately drug himself into a part of YouTube that he's not normally going to, and watching how the recommendations for what he should watch changed based on the things that he consumed to start with. So the internet in some ways and algorithms are built to reinforce the things that we already believe and know. So it does take some concerted, deliberate effort. My one, added commentary to that is I don't believe that we all need to just sort of surround ourselves by yes men or women who would say and reinforce the same things we already know. But I do think that part of the important aspect of broadening perspectives and inviting disagreement and discussion is, again, back to that idea of having a level of digital citizenship that comes with that and the responsibility to do that. So if you're extending my point of view, I'm not saying that you always have to be quote unquote nice. It's not about sugarcoating things. It's about, again, showing up as a digital citizen yourself that views your role in that discord and dialogue as a responsibility. So where I find people who are of maybe varying opinions to mine, I'll look in the comments of posts. So let's say there's a post that I inherently agree with. I'll look in the comments for somebody who has said something contrary to that, or someone who disagrees with it. And if they're doing it in a way that invites discussion and dialogue, I'm drawn to that because it's like, okay, tell me more about that. Help me. It doesn't necessarily, I don't want to make it all to be like everybody has to be polite all the time, because I think there's room for grit and a little bit of, edginess. Like, we can't always be super polite when we're trying to change minds. But I do think there's a healthy level of I am showing up with good intent here to actually be part of a broader dialogue versus I'm just coming here to lambast somebody and call names and make it personal and make it, that's different. So there's a level of behavior. I'm looking for somebody who shows up with a contrary opinion, but also the willingness to be part of a dialogue. And I gravitate toward those sorts of dissenting voices because they teach me something. And if they're willing to do it in a calm enough fashion that I can hear them, it actually makes me much more able to absorb and learn from something that is outside of my normal perspective.
Awesome. One of the posts that you've got, and this is a pinned tweet, so I'm going to repeat it and then I'm going to say it out loud and then I'll also post a link to it. But 99% of my job is repeating. No, there are no silver bullets in marketing. Yes, you have to test it. No, I can't tell you for sure that will work. Yes, you need brand marketing. No, that content is interesting to you, but not your audience. Yes, this is a long game. All of this stuff, and you're smiling and I'm nodding my head as I'm going through this as I butchered reading it. But all of this stuff it seems so simple, yet there's this desire out there in the marketplace where we think, for whatever reason, that somebody else has figured it out. Somebody else has found the easy button and the silver bullet and the quick fix that's just going to change this. And talk about the dieting and weight loss. And I've shared this with a couple of people. I think I'm still COVID-19 up right now, and I would like to figure out a way to drop 15 to 20 of that. And I know functionally how to do it, but for whatever reason, I'm not executing in the way that I can do it. So why is it that we think, hey, you know what, there's just got to be a better way. Somebody else out there is smarter than me, and they've figured out the shortcut that's going to help solve all of these things really quickly. Why do we gravitate toward those things? And what kind of inspired this tweet that went out just a little bit over about 2 months ago, back in July?
Yeah. Well, it was inspired by, like, honestly, my day-to-day life. I mean, my job is advising companies on marketing and from within LinkedIn, but that's what I do for a living. And the fundamentals of marketing don't change. They just don't. The tactics change, and some of the mechanics of, the downstream work, execution work, some of that changes. But just because, again, channels and mediums and all that sort of thing. But the fundamental aspects of marketing that are immutable are that our job is persuasion and guiding human behavior and understanding human behavior. Those things are as old as humanity itself. So we tend to overcomplicate it because, to your point, humans are creatures of excitement. We want something new. We want something shiny. We're drawn to, like, things that are sexy and different. And doing the same thing day in and day out is boring, and it feels boring. And it's just like eating the same thing every day feels boring, or not eating the same thing every day feels boring. But it is. I mean, so much of good marketing is about not whiz bangs and fancy techniques and some kind of crazy viral or guerrilla marketing tactic. It's about consistency, showing up every day, doing things in a quality fashion, and caring about the audience that you're trying to reach. Those fundamental things don't change. We want to change it up because we want it to be exciting. And every once in a while, a brand will do something that makes it into the press because they do something fun and exciting. But we forget about that as soon as it happens almost. Gimmicks don't have staying power. What has staying power is understanding your customer and showing back up time and time again to try to deliver something of value to them. And yes, there are times and places where, we need to maybe catch somebody's attention with something clever, but I would give up all the clever marketing in the world in the entire rest of my career if I would be guaranteed consistency, because I will take consistency over clever any day of the week. So, I'm oftentimes, like, I joke that my job is half PowerPoints and half therapy, because I sit with marketing people and tell them these things, because part of my job is not to tell them that there's a silver bullet. It's actually that they need to return to a level of fundamentals that they might have forgotten and moved beyond thinking it was too simple or it was too easy that way, or that was, like, just not sexy enough. It's like, if you haven't gotten back to the point where you have executed relentlessly on the foundations of marketing, you have no business trying to go do something sexy and clever yet, because you're building it. My analogy for this, when we wrote The Now Revolution, was about building a building on quicksand. It's like, if the foundation isn't rock solid, all of the fancy windows and gables and wallpaper and, Tiffany windows are all going to fall into the earth. So, good fundamentals aren't always sexy, but they are so, so critical. So I don't know, I guess that's my personal marketing crusade, is, like, to remind people that the fundamentals don't change and still need our attention and devotion.
Can you distinguish the difference? And I know you did this in a couple of the stories that you incorporated in what you just shared there, but can you just be really clear? What are the differences between fundamentals? How would you differentiate fundamentals and tactics? Someone said, hey, I don't know which category this falls into. Is it a fundamental thing, or is it a tactic that's going to change over time? How do I distinguish between the two?
It's a great question. So a lot of people conflate strategy and tactics. Mm-hmm. And so if we think about fundamentals as strategy, those are the whys and the whats that need to get done no matter what. Yep. It's, why are you in business? Why does your business exist? Why are you in the market to begin with? And what is it that you deliver that is valuable, different, interesting, or somehow useful to the world at large. Those things are part of your strategic direction. And they're the ones that are not seasonal. They're the ones that are a little bit evergreen and that they have durability. Strategy can change, but for the most part, they're the things upon which everything else is built. Tactics are thinking about the things like when you're driving a car, fundamentally, you need four wheels on the road. You're not going anywhere without that. So what are your four wheels on the road that have to be in place for your business to thrive in the universe? And I say business because marketing is just a function of business. It is not, separate from, it is not like some clever little thing that we do. It is endemic to business itself. And then the tactics are the execution pieces. How are you going to get that done? And the how can vary. So in a digital world, there's all these different channels and opportunities for us to use paid advertising or organic content or community building or social networks. All of those are just the how. And those are fleeting. They change. They often vary based on audience or culture or vertical or industry. So the tactical things are not immutable. They're the ones that shift around all the time. And a lot of times they can replace one another. So you can swap one out for the other, or you can optimize against them because this one works better than another one. But again, it's a layer. Like you've got to have all of the foundational building blocks in place first if you add the tactics on top of something that's shaky, the tactics aren't going to work anyway, it's crazy to me how many times people ask me like, well, should I be using video in my social media or should I be, using text as my channel? And I'm always having to back people up going, you know what, if the content sucks, it doesn't matter what tactic you use. So let's get back to like, what are you trying to say and why, and who are you saying it to? And those fundamental questions, again, I feel dumb sometimes because I'm asking such simple things, but they are things that most people have forgotten to ask themselves. So without them, none of the tactics will work.
And it's fascinating when you think about doing this inside an organization, whether it's a large organization or a small organization. There are small organizations who have struggled with the why and the what type stuff. And there are large organizations who struggle with the why and the what as you move across departments. So it's these basic things, as simple as they sound. I would challenge folks out there, are you actually asking these questions? What problem do you solve? Who cares about that problem? Why do they care about it? How are they solving that problem today? And if they're not solving the problem, then maybe they don't really need to solve the problem or they don't care about it. And then how would you solve it differently? Like these are just basic core questions, whether we're in sales or marketing, they're problem solving questions. What problem are we solving? What are some common mistakes associated with that problem? How have people gone through the process of solving that problem? Why is it important to solve the problem? Who, what, why, where, when, how? Get back to your channel, your inner journalist, and just go through and start asking those questions and then go a level deeper and start doing that root cause analysis. Why do you think, do people struggle with root cause analysis too, Amber, from your perspective and and how you work with people and organizations? Is that a challenge out there?
All the time. And I go through a couple of different exercises. Actually, I use some design thinking work to help them return to those basics because people want to skip past that part often and they get stuck at the tactical level. So they're starting to look for the dials to turn and the levers to throw that are the root causes. And it's like, no, you're not at the root. You're actually diagnosing at the tactical level. So I say all the time, you cannot fix broken strategy with tactical optimization. You can throw all the levers and make the button blue and you can, change all those feature level things, but if the infrastructure isn't sound, those things are always going to fail anyway. So one technique I love is, it's a classic thing that goes all the way back to the Kaizen methodology in Toyota, is the 5 whys. So asking yourself, okay, that campaign failed. Why did it fail? Okay, we didn't get as many leads as we wanted. Okay, why didn't we get as many leads as we wanted? Well, maybe people just didn't fill out the form. Okay, well, why didn't they fill out the form? So we get back to fundamentally, maybe the piece of content we had wasn't interesting. Maybe the messaging was wrong. Maybe the value proposition was skewed. Maybe the product sucks and it doesn't matter how much the content is good. Maybe fundamentally, like, we're not selling a thing anybody wants to buy, but having to dive deep and keep asking yourself why, to the point where you can backtrack it all the way to some of the basic blocking and tackling is so critical. And, our egos are wrapped up in this stuff. This is work that we're building, so we care about whether it looks like we did a good job or not. And sometimes looking at points of failure means looking at our own decisions and being like, whoops, I got that one wrong. But if you're not willing to be wrong about something, man, you can never fix something that's broken. So you have to be willing to sort of suck it up and be like, wow, that was a bad call. I guess I better change that and do something different. Again, it's simple, but not easy. And it's something we don't do enough of in business.
Well, and think about it. Like, we're talking about basic questions that are simple, not easy, things that we don't do enough. So give yourself the freedom out there to ask these questions and be okay with the idea that you're going to make a mistake, rather than go through this view of saying, you know what, I got this, I've got it figured out. This is the way that I'm going to do it. And I just need X in order to solve for Y, or I just need Z in order to solve for Y. Rarely is it just an X or Z thing. If it was an X or Z thing, you probably would have figured that out at some other point in time. You wouldn't be struggling with the core things. So just get back to the basics. Get back to the basics. Who, what, why, where, what.
Because, our organizations are naturally very functionally siloed. That's how we kind of built organizations today. So, all the marketing people hang with the marketing people, the sales people hang with the sales people, the technology people hang with the technology people. But when it's working really well, business is an interdependent system. All of the pieces influence the other pieces, which is why I always joke or laugh a little bit when people are like, how much revenue did marketing drive? It's like, man, if we were solely the one factor that influenced revenue, like, I could make that case all day long that I could do this really well. But my ability to generate revenue for this company has to do with sales execution on the front lines and product execution on the back lines, making sure that I've got something worth selling, that I've got an audience receptive to my messaging, that I've got salespeople who can execute on that last mile. So we are all in that revenue engine together. All of these interconnected systems in a business influence one another. And the biggest mistake we make is when we start trying to diagnose problems only within the shell of our own functional area, because there are so many influence points that if we can't get better at talking to the people across from us in other parts of the organization that also make, very meaningful material decisions about the direction of our companies, none of us can do our own functions well because we've got blinders on. So one way to get better at that is just to start talking, understand the finances of your company. How does it make money? How does it lose money? How often does that happen? Talk to your customer success teams, or get the feedback straight from the mouths of the people buying the product. All of those things have to get looked at together, not in isolation, for us to properly diagnose all the root cause stuff you're talking about.
Well, and check your ego at the door too. Like, don't let your own agenda push things forward or elevate your own position. And it just all goes like these are basic things. We started talking about operating better in social networking environments, and we're bringing it into the business context, and it's the same stuff. Like, don't go in there with your own agenda of trying to pull out as much money or as much value as you can out of every relationship and making it about you. Remember, there are two common things in any customer, in any business. And I'm oversimplifying this, but when we're in the business, most of us all have the same domain name in our email address. We all have that at whatever it is in our email address. The other thing that's consistent is your customers are interacting all the way through the organization. What product develops impacts customers. What support works on impacts customers. What sales works on impacts customers. What marketing works on impacts customers. They may be at different areas of their journey, but the common thing is you have customers who are operating, going through your business, and everybody has the same domain. Yep. It's really not that complicated when you
not complicated, but not easy, because most people forget that our customers they don't delineate between, well, that was marketing's fault, or that was customer services fault, or that was a product fault. They have an interaction with our brand or our company and ascribe that at a macro level. So if you have a lousy experience with, Uber or Amazon or any of those companies, you're like, Uber sucks or Amazon sucks, not, gee, that customer service rep was terrible. So we ascribe this at a high level to the companies that we work with, which means we have to think about it from that perspective internally. It's like nobody casting blame for like, well, that part is a marketing problem versus a customer service problem. No, man, we're all in this trench together, building the reputation of our company in the marketplace. And if we don't treat it like a holistic problem, we're missing the fact that that is exactly how our customers look at it, because they don't differentiate between those areas of, and they don't care about the functional failings inside our organization. They care about the experience that they're having with us. So if we don't address those things at a holistic level, we're never going to solve those problems at a fundamental level for our customers.
And there was an adjutant general who had said this right at the beginning of a lot of the, how are we going to respond from a hospital perspective as we're moving into the COVID, all the COVID stuff. And the takeaway I got from that press conference is he stood up there and he said, we don't solve complex problems with complex solutions. We solve complex problems with simple solutions. Think about how can you simplify the things that are happening across your organization so that you can address these complex problems. And anytime you add layers to it, you create complexity. Anytime you remove things, you start to simplify things. And there are just some basic things that you can do there.
I've been in the business world now for, well, longer than I care to admit. We'll call it in the 20s years. And there are I can actually not come up with an example of a fundamental problem I had in any of those organizations that was solved by something complicated. Oftentimes it's like the missing linchpin somewhere. It's that one little thing that makes a world of difference. If you change that, everything else gets better. We need to be looking for those linchpin moments that are the things that are simple in our businesses, but that if they were changed could be completely game changing. Because most of the really good stuff happens in those moments, not the complicated ones.
Amber, this has been absolutely awesome. There are a couple of themes that have gone through this. One big one, and I talked with the kids, and it doesn't necessarily translate well for them, or at least it hasn't taken hold yet. But the whole think before you act, like just take that brief second to think. And I fall into this trap where I'll be doing things on my phone and I'll hit send on something, and then I'll wish there was an edit button in Twitter as an example. And it's good that there's an edit button on LinkedIn because I can go through and I can update my typos. But think before you act. Get back to basics. Treat people like people. Engage in things that matter. If you want to go out and help people and you want to make an impact, find where they're operating in those communities and get to know people in those communities and engage in a positive manner and deliver value. And then the impact will start to come together. Again, Amber, awesome discussion. Thanks for doing this. Where can people find out more about what you're working on, and where would you like to send folks to follow you?
Well, I mean, of course, I'd be remiss to not send you to LinkedIn first, right? I think that's like an occupational hazard. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Again, that's Amber Naslund on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find there. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is Amber Cadabra. I'm an OG Twitter user, so old school there, and I'm there all the time. I'm a little mouthier on Twitter, so fair warning for that. And then all of my like long tail writing and stuff like that, you can find about me over at brasstackthinking.com, which is my website.
Awesome. Thanks, Amber.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Amber, thanks. Please check out Amber's work. We'll include links in the show notes. If you know someone who'd benefit from hearing this discussion, please share it with them and let us know via Twitter or LinkedIn. I'd love to hear how you're applying the lessons learned and concepts discussed in your role today. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?